Hey guys, this is DJ Fun Kat Tron. I'm just bringing to you a short video just to demonstrate a couple of normally vinyl type scratches, but performed on CDJs, just showing a way that you can kind of perform these particular scratches. In my case on CDJ 1000 Mark III, so it's like a 12-year-old player that if I can do it on these, then you can definitely do it on more modern controllers or other similar media players. So I learnt these two scratches, or how to perform these two scratches, about a week ago from Jimi Needle's Monday Scratch Club. So it's the episode from the 2nd November 2020 that you can still check out now on Twitch. Basically, if you go to like the last 15-20 minutes, that's where these two scratches live. And the two scratches that I'm talking about are the wind down cut and the rake scratch. So I'm going to show ways that you can kind of perform those two scratches on CDJs. I would say, because I've probably had about a week to play with these, I certainly haven't mastered them, but I can certainly demonstrate them enough that I can show other people how to use them, and that if you carried on for another couple of weeks, you'd probably be able to master them yourself. Okay, so let's crack on. So first scratch is wind down cut, and as it turns out, I think when Jimmy was sort of discussing it on his show, he was kind of suggesting that you could probably use the master tempo to be able to do it. So if you put the CDJ to 100% and then wind it down, you could do it that way. You might be able to do that, but you end up with a kind of funny thing where you're kind of crossing your hands over. So I decided not to do it that way. Another suggestion was doing it with the touch and release controls sort of over here. But I've got to say, because I normally scratch on these things, if you have the touch and release controls sort of wound up so that you get a nice slow descent, what you can have is, when you part way through a scratch, is that the CDJ doesn't sort of guess your hand speed properly, and you can get sort of weird jumps in speed sort of part way through your scratch. So I tend to have these guys wound all the way off, and then I have the tension wound all the way off as well, which is kind of what you need for this scratch, because if you have the tension wound up, it kind of basically hardly goes anywhere. So if I go, you see when I let the thing go, it hardly moves any distance, whereas if I wind it back, you actually get quite a good movement out of it, which is sort of what you want for this scratch. So I'm going to show the scratch first, just with it playing regularly, and then I'm going to show the scratch performed with it in stop, which is like this, with the two light scratch flashing rather, so you can just sort of move it around. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to wind up my beats. So there you go. You can see that you can perform that, pretty well. I would say you're probably going to get a better sound out of, either a proper vinyl deck or something like a Rain 12 or a Denon SC6000M, just because you've got the weight of the platter sort of carrying it round. When they do that scratch, you're actually turning the record player off to get that sort of slow wind down sound. So in this, you've either got the CD taking it round for you, so you've got to take manual control of the platter, or, as I'm going to show you now, when it's in stop, it's just all you. You just move the platter, okay? So here we go. So the other advantage that you've got if you do it with it in stop, as I've got now, is that you can do it forwards and backwards. So the fun doesn't need to stop. Okay. So here we go. So there you go. That's another way that you can perform that scratch and extend it further. I mean, obviously the intention is to sort of wind down to a stop to kind of break out of a bunch of scratching, but I think it works equally well. You could just use it as a something to add a bit of a gap into your scratch to give it a bit of breathing space. So the next scratch that Jimi was talking about was wind down, sorry, not wind down, cut, the rake scratch. Okay, so rake scratch, you're kind of doing a ratcheting motion like that. So inching forward with one hand, then inching forward with the next, inching forward, passing the vinyl and underneath your fingers, passing the parcel. The difficulty with this, as Jimi said, is basically you've only got like 6.5 inches on CDJ 1000 Mark III to kind of play with the total platter width, and of that, you only really got this bit in between here. Because if you try and do a sort of rotating movement and you're touching the window, firstly you don't want to cover the window because that's where your play markers are. But secondly, because you've got a lot more friction on this window, it doesn't turn nicely with your hand when you're scratching. So one suggestion was that you could do 2 fingers side by side interlaced, but again, that sort of covers up the window. And I haven't got particularly big hands, so if you had any bigger hands than mine, you'd probably be up to halfway, and you just wouldn't really be able to do it. So the next nearest way that I found was actually to kind of put one finger over the other. So I'm kind of almost crossing my fingers, sticking them in the middle, and then ratcheting forward like that. You can kind of do the same thing. I haven't practiced this particular method for a long while, but I mean you'll be able to see. So here we go. So there we go. You can kind of see that that's possible. The only thing I'd say, because your hands are in this kind of weird interlocked state here, it's going to be difficult for you to kind of move away out of that, without a lot of practice, to be able to get back to the crossfader or something like that and do something else interesting. So from that point of view, it's a bit static. But there is another way that you can kind of approach it, and that's to use a technique that I use normally when it's in cue, called finger banging, basically. So it's a Fun Kat Tron finger bang. So when you're finger banging, what you're doing is you're basically making rhythmic patterns on the platter. Okay, so it's a bit like if you're playing drum beats or whatever on these pads. Okay, but instead of just smacking the button, what you're doing instead is you're pressing down and then moving it a little tiny bit. So if I bring my crossfader in a little bit, it's like, which is exactly the same sound that you get when you're doing this kind of action, trying to do the rake scratch. So if I wind my beats, I'll show you what I mean. Etc. So we go. That's another way to approach the same thing. If you practice that enough, you can actually swap. You can do patterns of 2s, patterns of 4s, whatever, and you can do. Your hands are basically not interlocked with each other, so you're more free to get this hand back to the crossfader. So you can just carry on doing normal scratches. So there we go. Hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for watching. Cheers.